I just had this calling. I'm like, back in the day, like I've always heard about different stories of Bitcoin. Oh my gosh, I think it was timing and
had this passion for financial markets, you were watching CNBC, but also you loved cooking.
yes.
And now those two worlds don't really collide, yet they did. You managed to create a company, right? Run a food company.
Yeah.
So tell us about DDC.
Yeah, so after doing equity research for about 8 years, I just had this calling. I'm like, I want to create something that can encourage younger generation. Like back then I was also younger, but younger generation to enjoy cooking. Because like that transition from growing in the US and coming back to Hong Kong, I realized a lot of my friends, they didn't like to cook, or they think cooking was like really like old school, I don't want to go into the kitchen. But I want to change that perception, because like cooking is a part of a lifestyle, right? Especially spending so much time here in the US. So yeah, that was like my thing. I really wanted to do it. And so I was in, equity research, and over the weekend, I would just like go grocery shopping, write recipes, and then create my content. And then I started sharing it on Facebook and Instagram, more on Facebook back in 2012. And so I, kind of gathered my first 100,000 follower on Facebook. That's when, our first advertising partner, which is like a local sauce brand in Hong Kong, reached out to me and say, oh, I really enjoy your content. It's very different. No one really focusing on Asian home cooking. Is there a way to collaborate? And back then I was, doing really well in the bank. I loved, stock market. But I was thinking like, you know what, I want to give it a try. Like this is something new, and I don't like to do things, like half-heartedly. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go all in. And so I kind of quit banking and say I'm just going to go all in DDC, day cook, and see where it goes. And now, 13 years later, here I am.
How did you stumble upon Bitcoin? What's that story?
So, back in the day, like I've always heard about different stories of Bitcoin, but never really focused on it, except in 2021. So more recent years. It was during COVID. And then, back that year, China also prohibited, Bitcoin investment. That's why in 2021, it was unique being in Hong Kong, where a lot of Bitcoin talent and Bitcoin capital came from mainland China to Hong Kong. And so a lot of my friends were really getting into this space. And, I have a lot of friends in finance still. And so in the same year, I think a lot of Bitcoin became more mainstream as well. Like Tesla bought like $1.5 billion of Bitcoin, and the other credit card platforms started integrating like crypto services or start talking about it. That's when I personally started investing in it, but in, very small scale. But, I never really thought about, okay, applying it into a listed company. So fast forward a few years, I listed DDC on the New York Stock Exchange at the end of 2023. And then I still remember last year, summertime in Shanghai, one of my very early investor. I mean, he's been supporting DDC and me for like 10 years. And he himself has been in Bitcoin since 2014. So he's very deep into the space. Every time we catch up, I'm really excited. I'm like, you know what? I'm working on this like M&A ideas. We're looking into acquiring this brand. And he's like, Norma, great, wonderful. And I've seen you work so hard in building this company for the past 10 years. And he's like, what if you leverage what you have at DDC, right? But not just acquiring traditional assets. What about buying digital assets, in particular Bitcoin? And so, for me, it was like, a very new idea. He definitely pushed me, to think outside of the box. But I'm really grateful to have this background in finance and also my personal experience in Bitcoin. Otherwise, I think if any other CEOs, like when an investor just give you this idea that, oh, you should buy Bitcoin with your company, I think it would just like go over their head. But I was like, okay, interesting. Tell me more. And so he's like, well, take a look at MSTR. And so I was I go back to my equity research days.
Yeah.
I start looking into it. I'm like, well, they're definitely doing something right? Look at the stock chart. And that was September. But then I was really busy and I came to the States for another trip. And then after November, I looked at it again. It went from $40 billion to $70 billion in a very short period of time. So I'm like, all right, maybe I should put some things down and really go deep into understanding the playbook. So, I'm always really grateful to have a very good, like, growing network of supporter around me, including like mentors and investors, and in particular to this investor, right? He's become such a good friend now, but without him really like giving me this idea, I don't think, I would have, quote unquote, stumbled upon it.
In recent months, you announced a Bitcoin Treasury, so you're entering that growing arena. So tell me about that, because Michael Saylor famously says that Bitcoin is on a need-to-know basis. So why was DDC on a need-to-know basis?
Oh my gosh, I think it was timing, and it was just doing the right thing at the right time and having that right opportunity. I think everything lined up perfectly. And when I look back in just a few minutes time, I mean, so much has happened already. At that moment, I realized like this is the best way of a company to build long-term shareholder value, right? And having my background to look into, okay, Bitcoin versus other crypto assets. I mean, there are a lot of other DATs out there doing different types of treasury plays that, we believe Bitcoin is the asset to hold for the long term. And for me to present that to the board, and we're thinking about ways to integrate it with food also, integrating it with the underlying food business. There's actually a lot of interesting things that we can think about. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to create real long-term value for our shareholder. If you look at the macro environment, it couldn't be a better place and time to do this now, because a lot of people ask me, why now? Why not like last year or 2 years ago? A few years ago, we can't do it. I think it'll be a much more difficult environment to do it, right? Especially we haven't listed yet. Even being listed, I think the overall regulatory environment was not as supportive and as friendly, and the regulatory framework is not as clear as it is now. And so with that, I think overall, I would describe it as a structural change that happened around Bitcoin in the past 18 months that made it possible for me to even think about it. And so after having considered it, and because we are a small microcap company, it was, I would say, relatively easier for me to bring it to the board and win their support and then launch it. Because I think if we have a much more scalable business, I think it'll be harder to convince the board that, this is not a major pivot, right? So it was like the size of the company, the time, and the environment that made it perfect opportunity. So once again, it was my job really to look out for the best opportunity for our shareholder. And it's my job to convince the board that this is the best for us and we should take this forward. So I'm glad that, we got the support and here we are.
Have like a vision for how many Bitcoin you want to own? Do you want to eventually go into the preferred market like Strategy has been doing and issuing those types of instruments? What's the plan?
I think I want to keep the plan right now in the near term very simple and focused, which is just, stacking. And recently I shared my target of, 10,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year, which is a very aggressive target. But at the same time, I feel like we have the right support and, structure and framework in place to make that achievable. For example, in the past, couple months, ever since we met in the Vegas conference, we launched our first Bitcoin-focused fundraise. And, we raised, $528 million from Anson and a group of investors that are, very Bitcoin and Web3 focused. So I think that in itself is a great start for us to, start stacking. And the second thing we did is last week, we filed another $500 million shelf, F3, that would enable us to have even quicker access to the capital depending on market condition. So I think, our plan is always like, have the most flexibility for DDC in the near term to do capital raises that is accretive to investors so we can continue to stack in a very disciplined manner. So, in terms of are we going to go into the preferred market, I think that is still too early for us right now, given the size of the company. And there is still a lot of I would say more plain vanilla, straightforward financial tools that we haven't really maximized or capitalized with. So maybe not yet. I think we still have a lot of available facilities in place that we can tap into to hopefully reach that 10,000 Bitcoin goal.
Yeah. Do you think that it's a competition or a race? Do you think it's all just great for the space? Do you worry that it could form a bubble? Like some people are very nervous that it could be like a .com situation. What do you think about all of it?
I think is good for the space in general. Like if I have to, just a one-liner, I think it's great. Like more companies coming in, adopting Bitcoin as a treasury strategy, maybe a very aggressive strategy or like conservative strategy is great. Just I think every listed or private company in the future will own Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So it's like almost inevitable.
Yeah.
And we feel like there's one every day because we are so deep in the space and we're monitoring every day. But I think when we talk to other TradFi investor or just a friend, they won't even know what it is. So I still think because we're in the zone, we think that, oh, there's so many of them, but we're still such a tiny, tiny little niche market. So I wish that we will have more companies coming in, right? We can be, there are more multi-billion-dollar companies built on Bitcoin accumulation strategy. So, I would say community, like the investor community, retail investor will take Bitcoin strategy even more seriously going forward. I think we are still at a very, very early stage. Whether do we see as a competition or do I worry as a bubble? Like, I think it's really interesting in every space, like even in content. It's the same. Like we were one of the earlier lifestyle content creator in mainland China, right? And a lot of people start doing content. And then people are like, oh, okay, this market is flooded with content creator. But it's a natural evolution of a space. And I think it's healthy, right? It's healthy in the sense there are more people coming in and it's just basically survival of the fittest, right? Whether you're ready to grow this for the long term or if you try it and you can't, then you stop. And so, I think it's natural. And of course, it's important for us to come together and always be I would say like comrades almost to each other and share best practices so we can avoid a massive bubble like scenario, right? Because nobody wants that.
No.
And so I think overall in general, the more people that come into the space, the better. And I mean, right now, if you look at all the communities are discussing, and even like Tim Cosmo, what he's doing with all the Bitcoin Treasury, conferences, it's exactly doing that, right? Create a stage where we all come together, and then we can all learn from each other. And even though it feels like we're one-upping each other, but it's good, it's like in a good way. It's like, okay, this is what we want to create transparency for everybody. So now here's a dashboard. Now it's a cooler dashboard. Now we have a cooler dashboard. Hey, that's good for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so I think overall, I'm a very positive person. So I think it's all great for the space.
Any other things that you're following just in terms of just the developments we've seen, more institutional adoption, more regulatory clarity? Like what's top of mind for you?
Top of mind for me, I think because I've been so focused on just execution. Right now, I think is still focusing on our strategy and how we continue to add differentiation versus other treasury companies out there. And we think about how we create or amplify our differentiating factor. One is the, originating from Chinese market, we have access to Chinese investor. I think that's one angle. But then we also think about, how we acquire Bitcoin. There's innovative ways where we can work with massive Bitcoin holders and Bitcoin investors to also create value for each other. So we're not just, fundraising and buying a spot. There's another way for us to differentiate ourselves. So top of mind for me is like, okay, how do we focus now that we have, good access to funding, continue to stack, but stack in a way where we can bring in some innovation while we're doing it.
What do you think is most needed to get more of like the mainstream adoption that a lot of people are looking for? Because we're at over 100,000 and still when you walk into an average place, people are like, Bitcoin, it's too much, I'm too late, it's this or that. They have some, myth that they've latched onto and they're against it. What do you think will change that?
I think it's through us sharing what we're doing. And just be like very authentic in sharing our journey and what we think, like why is good, why you should invest, right? What I think is good. It's just through education. And I think the best way to educate is just to share your own experience, right? And some people might think that, oh, yeah, that's a great sharing. Some people are like, you're just lucky. It could happen, but it's just consistently it's almost like turning into a recorder. That every single person I meet now at a new event, they always ask me, so what do you do? I'm like, I'm in food and Bitcoin. That's like the best opening.
It's a best opener. Yeah,
it's the icebreaker. Best. Like, oh. And so I remember, I shared this with you like this summer when I was in Lisbon. I arrived and I didn't really know anybody, but I went to like a YPO event and the local chapter event. And so I met other female entrepreneurs as well. And once again, food and Bitcoin. And so I share with them like my journey and what I think. And, a few of them actually messaged me afterwards. They're like, Norma, I loved your story. Like, can you point me to some books or like podcasts? And I send them your podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
It's like any podcast that I can learn more about Bitcoin, so I can be more educated in my Bitcoin investment. I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I want to do and what we are doing right now, which is like just telling our stories so more people can have access to this information and seeing success stories, right? And so once again, feeds back to the more company that does this and does it well, it's going to be a very positive factor for driving mass adoption.